Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday morning, so I think everybody should have had enough time to get their questions in, so let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Schwarzer has a Luva CRT with a VGA input. And if I remember correctly, this is the amazing CRT that he was able to get a homebrew VGA card that allows for native 480p input into it, which is awesome. And they're looking for a YPbPr to RGBHV transcoder. That part's important. I'll get back to that. Are there any I could recommend? Currently, they're using an OSSC and an HDMI to VGA converter to get it working, but they'd like to use the OSSC elsewhere. It's neat to use the OSSC to line double their 15 kHz sources to 31 kHz on the set, but they mainly use it for Xbox and PS2 over component, and there it seems unnecessary to use the OSSC. So my answer to you is money. All about money. What components do you already own? What do you need to buy from scratch? Because the OSSC is an amazing tool for that. And since you are running your analog sources in, you only need the OSSC for video. So you can get one of those, well, you already have it, but for anybody else listening, you can get like a cheap $8 HDMI to VGA converter that does a perfect conversion with no crushing of the blacks or anything like that. So you can get a very good picture quality without any black level differences or whatever else. So that is an awesome solution. And there are definitely alternatives, but will it cost more than just buying a second OSSC? So first of all, what cables are you using for the Xbox and PlayStation 2? Do you just have crappy ones lying around because you never felt the need to upgrade, which is totally fine, by the way? Or did you invest in some HD Retrovision cables for it? And for the Xbox, maybe it's HD Retrovision cables into that adapter, or HD Retrovision Wii cables into the Xbox adapter that Consoles for You made. You know, that's certainly one thing, because if you've already invested in those awesome cables, just buying another OSSC if you need it, or a different kind of scaler, or making a GBS control or something would definitely be cheaper. But there are other alternatives for you. First of all, they have Xbox VGA boxes that you could just buy. So if you have cheap Xbox cables, that's a great solution right there. For PlayStation 2, you could try to do something like get a PlayStation 2 to HDMI adapter. And then I think there's a couple out there. I think we just did a write-up on one, and then just buy a couple more HDMI to VGA converters or something like that. However, how are you going to deal with 480i? Does it accept 480i over RGBHV or not? Because remember, even if I think you could hack the menu to be 480p, but even if you boot a game into 480p mode, it still has to start in 480i. So you could do all of that. You could get a comp to RGB and then use an Extron RGB interface, which buying all that stuff would cost more than OSSC. But if you already own them, by all means, try that. But the two main things: cost. Is it just cheaper to get a second OSSC or another solution for whatever else that you need? And or maybe a GBS control for this or something like that. That could work. That would actually probably be one of the cheapest solutions, is just get a GPS control to replace the OSSC. And yeah, there's some setup involved, but once you've gotten it set up, I don't think you'll ever need to really make any changes to it. So unless something happens and you have to log into the web interface to change it, should just keep working. I really don't use my GBSC in a main setup. I've always just used it for testing and stuff like that. So you could do all of that stuff. You could buy a bunch of converters. But honestly, I would really just go back to cost and see where you go from there. The other very important question is, will this accept a 15 kilohertz source over VGA? Even if it does terrible scaling, even if it adds 1 million frames of lag, if it works, at least you could boot your PlayStation 2 into 480p mode. But that's definitely something that you'll have to let me know on. So sure, I failed you this week, but at least I could point you in the right direction. So get back at me with, will it accept 480i over RGBHV? And what other tools do you already own that you might be able to do this with? Or what could you swap the OSSC out with? But while this should be a very easy answer to you, it's not. I need more stuff, because you could end up getting, some decent component video to RGB HV transcoders, but most are terrible. Most are absolute junk. So, the OSSC might actually end up being a cheaper solution. So let me know what you think, and we'll work through this, hopefully next Q&A, or you could always message me if you need to. Now moving over to Patreon, Ken Bakes wants to know, when using a VCR DVD combo, what happens to a composite S-video signal routed through the VCR and output through YPbPr? Does capturing VHS this way preserve the full S-video signal quality when digitizing VHS? So that is all going to depend on the player, and most likely it's going to mess something up. So what you'd end up doing is, if you run the composite or S-video into this and it outputs component video, it's going to be doing a conversion to it. And some do a perfectly fine job, especially when going from S-video to component video. But if you're talking about composite video in, then you're at the mercy of its comb filter. And while you really can't notice a huge difference between composite and S-video, if the tape, all VHS tapes are encoded in YC, so why not just capture it that way as well, so there's not constant conversion going on? And it's one of those things where you're not going to notice a massive difference. It's not going to be like the difference between VHS and Laserdisc, but it's still something that, if you're capturing something that's important to you, spend a few extra bucks and get the right signal going through. But if you're talking about S-video, give it a try and see. Maybe, if you're a nerd like me, you could do something like record some color bars onto a VHS tape and then play that back direct and then through the component video converter and then see what you get. Is it going to destroy the colors? Does it look basically the same? If it's something like, I just got to get some tapes digitized, then that should be fine. But if it's something that's important to you, really taking the time to get it right will make a difference in the long run, especially when you start scaling stuff. And that video is still coming as soon as I possibly can, by the way. It's done. I'm just waiting on the developer to finish a very complicated feature. But that's when you really start to see, after you've scaled these things to 4K using proper methods, you really start to see where all of the little details matter when capturing 480i. Also curious if any updates have happened on utilizing an AverMedia 4K PCI card in a Thunderbolt enclosure. Any new news on 4K 60 through Thunderbolt? So 4K 60 lossless is just never going to be possible through Thunderbolt. 4K 60 at H.264 or H.265 compression absolutely would be possible. And to be honest, the only people who need lossless 4K 60 are people like myself, My Life in Gaming, Digital Foundry, who dig in and do lossless capture comparison shots where they zoom in. So if that's you, then yeah, you're definitely going to want to wait for something like Thunderbolt 5 should handle it all. But if you just need to capture 4K 60 for streaming, for making fun videos, playthroughs, and you're not doing a deep dive analysis, that Live Gamer Bolt is still a great device. And I had a lot of good luck with it as well. Lastly, any advice on getting rid of an OSD on a Sony VHS DVD recorder combos? No luck with settings or display button. No, if there's no setting in there that allows you to turn it off, then it's not possible. But once again, to go back what I said before, if what you're capturing is really important to you, spend, $150 or something on an S-video VHS player that can disable the OSD, that can disable the crazy video processing, and, and really just kind of do it right and, use the methods that I've shown. And there's more methods out there, but I'm not sure if I'll ever have time to do a deep dive video because that stuff takes hundreds of hours, like the video coming up eventually. It's done. I got to leave like a little timer in case I get hit by a meteor before the developer's finished with the feature. That way it'll automatically go live. So all that work that I did on it could still be out there for people. But thanks, Ken. One more quick one from Ken. Is there any benefit in going from a G-SCART switch through a SCART Cleaner into the RetroTink 4K? And the short answer is no, zero, and I definitely don't recommend doing it. But to explain a little bit, the SCART Cleaner is a device that has two main features. One is to strip any of the information out of the sync line other than sync itself, and then raise the voltage to TTL levels for devices that require higher level voltage on sync, which is never SCART. If you're going into any SCART device, you never want that higher voltage. It also has a low pass filter on the THS chip, but that is really the only scenario in which you might use that. So it was designed for use with the direct capture into data path vision capture cards, but it could also be used into Extron RGB interfaces and the rare moment where you have a finicky monitor that really needs that type of sync connection. And especially if you have something with a D-sub input, so now it also does that connector conversion as well. In that scenario, the G-SCART switch has sync stripping on it already built in, but the RetroTinks don't need it anyway. And if for whatever reason you were to convert that back to SCART, you would also need a resistor on the SCART line to drop the voltage back down, because you never want to put the high voltage into it. Whereas if you're going into the VGA input, fine. Now, if you're talking about, you just want to route everything through the VGA input of the RetroTink 4K for ease of use, that is something that you could do, but I would just turn the switches off on the SCART Cleaner and just let everything pass through, and that should just work fine. But there are much cheaper devices, or you could make your own cable to do that if that's what you wanted to do. But in the scenario of you already own a SCART Cleaner, you don't need it anymore for anything else, sure, that would absolutely work. But it's a good question. That's something that's definitely not necessary unless, the scenario I just described. So yeah, that's a cool one. But no, the SCART Cleaner is a device that had way more use cases than I thought when we came up with it, but that's not one of them. But you never know. So thanks for asking. Next up, MMTTMCC. I forgot what your name was. I'm sorry. I think you had told me at one point to just refer to you as one thing, but my bad. I'll just read out your screen name like a total moron. But anyway, question for me and maybe listeners as well. Many are recommending getting Super Nintendo's recapped given age, but should people also consider getting Super Nintendo games recapped in addition to replacing batteries? Their collection means a lot to them, and they want to get ahead of all possible longevity issues, but they're not readily finding the Surface offered. Any tips? So that's on a case-by-case basis. For me personally, I think my attitude on this is if I'm going to take the time to open up my SNES cartridge, clean the contacts, not with Brasso, just with isopropyl, a pink pencil eraser, and then another round of isopropyl afterwards, if I'm going to replace the battery on it for my save games, I'm going to do a visual inspection and see what else is there. If there's resistors on it, I might just add a tiny bit of extra solder to the resistors just to kind of reflow everything and keep them from cracking over time. If there's a capacitor, I might think about replacing that one, especially when you think of the cost of what a capacitor is. You're definitely going to pay more on shipping. So if you're going to do your collection, you might want to go through a couple and see. But I don't think a lot of games have capacitors in them. I could be wrong on that one, but if it does, sure, why not? I mean, anytime you have a device that has one of those, it's going to eventually dry out and die or leak out, which is the problem. So my advice is do a visual inspection and decide for yourself. You could go and start replacing resistors, but I think I've heard of that. I think I've heard of resistors in cartridges dying twice in the over decade I've run RetroRGB. So maybe it's a thing I'm just not hearing a lot about, but and in fact, the only time I've really heard of it is in cases of a good modder is contacted by somebody that says, hey, my favorite game, a rare game, whatever else, can you fix it? It's not working right. And then they go through and check all the traces and all that stuff. But yeah, it's, question for the listeners, I guess. How many of these cartridge-based games have capacitors in them? Because I can't remember. Certainly not all of them, but I don't know. I'm going from the top of my head. But that's a great question. And, there's a lot of people that say you don't have to replace capacitors until they're bad, but I respectfully disagree. They're not wrong, but it's just one of those things where it's like, if you're already taking the time to do it, you're already planning your time, you're already planning your tools, the components, the parts that you're going to need, why not just do it? Do like in Tito's videos where he does a full teardown, washes the whole console, cleans the motherboard, and does all that stuff. Don't put it in a dishwasher. Use all the methods that we've shown, all the proper methods. But I would personally do it if I ran into it, and if it was important to me. Just because it's not, as long as you do it right, it certainly isn't going to hurt anything, and it will extend the life of your stuff. So if anybody disagrees, please let me know. I'm always open to other opinions. But it's I've had some pro modders who are definitely better than me kind of slightly disagree on that one, and it still hasn't changed my opinion at all, but maybe I'm missing something. Next up, Arkanoid is reorganizing their game collection as the number of consoles, consoleized handhelds, arcade multis, and retro PCs have gotten way too large for their current setup. They're putting together an IKEA bookcase hack with glass doors and filtered vent fans to cut back on dust. They need to run an RGBHV cable in the wall about 12 to 15 feet. Mike Chi said they should be good with that length. Do I know where they can get a high-quality cable of that length? They can put their own BNC or VGA connectors on the end if needed. So what I would do is check out Monoprice and maybe even Amazon or something like that. But here's where people are going to get annoyed with me, and I'm sorry to say this, but if you're going to cut your wall open and you're going to run a cable like this, you want to be really, really sure that the cable you're using is shielded. So I would run any cable shielding tests that you can. One of the best ones to run is just the first level in Super Mario World. You see the bright blue background. If you get a checkerboard pattern around that or any wavy lines, then you know that that's a very easy way to know that the shielding isn't good. However, you might want to cut the cable open also. And I hate saying that. I hate wasting stuff. I hate throwing money away like that. But you really got to put it into context of the full job. If you take the drywall off your walls, or you start cutting holes to run cables through them, or you run them through something, that's a lot of effort and a lot of time. And if you go through all that and a week later you keep noticing weird glitches and interference on the screen, that's a lot of money lost to try to fix that. So cutting the cable open and double checking that all of the individual lines is shielded might be something that you want to do. And maybe get crafty and cut it like a foot on each side from the main connector on the end, so you could then reuse all of that. Now you would have two VGA ends with cable dangling if you ever needed to wire anything. Now you've got about 10 feet of just shielded cable to use. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you're going to use all that at some point. If not, I don't know. I would just make sure that you run shielding tests before you do anything like that, because you really want to make sure that you're not going to end up with stuff. In this room, I ran a very, very long RCA cable all along the wall so that I get it over to where the subwoofer used to be. And when I did that, before I took the time to do it, before I ran it through, because there was a window I had to go around, before I went into the wall at all, I just ran the cable around the floor over everything. It was ugly. It was a mess. But I watched a couple movies and I listened very carefully, and I didn't get any hum whatsoever. No hum, no buzz, no crackle, nothing. And then I ran it through the wall and it was fine. So I didn't feel the need to do a shielding test on it. I cut the cable open because I spent a couple hours watching movies making sure that it wasn't bad. But if you don't have the ability to do that, just cut the cable open. You're going to save a lot of money in the long run. And if it is unshielded, you're going to jump for joy that you did it. So I probably way over explained that, but a lot of people come down on me when I'm like, oh yeah, just do this or throw that out when you're done. And I'd never want to waste anybody's money, which is why I'm telling you maybe the best solution is to cut it open. But let me know if you want any more tips or anything like that. And good luck for your retro setup. Sounds pretty badass. Next up, Ali is looking to build a multicade, preferably out of a CRT-based arcade machine, but they're kind of overwhelmed in what to do, and they're not sure whether to use Mister or MAME over a PC, and they don't really have any MAME experience, so they kind of wanted to hear thoughts on it, and they wanted to keep the budget under $2,500. So I think that's a very reasonable budget to have for something like this, and I think you have to decide how far you want to go. The first thing you need to understand is anytime you're using a CRT-based arcade machine, there's always going to be imperfections. And if you think that you're going to obsess over every little detail, you might want to think of doing something like getting an arcade 1-up and hacking that with other stuff. It's going to be much cheaper, much easier to do, and you really don't need to mess with too many things. But you said you wanted a CRT-based setup, which I personally would always prefer if possible. And your budget's $2,500, so you could try to get something like an awesome candy cab, which is amazing, but trying to find one for that price in decent condition that doesn't need a ton of work is hard. So one of the things that Ali mentioned was picking up something like a CRT-based Multicade, kind of like the mini one that I gutted a couple years ago. I gutted 2 of those, and thanks to Arcade Brooklyn for getting those for me, by the way, too. That was, love that place. But that's kind of one of those things where you just maybe watch my video on it and see what I did. Because what you're going to have to do with a CRT-based multicade is rip out whatever's there and hope that it's JAMA-based. Hope that there's a JAMA connector in there. And if it is, then you're pretty cool at that point. You could just kind of wire up whatever you need. And if you need more buttons, you could just add those. And you could add them through the JAMA connector or do it manually or however else you want to hack through it. But that shouldn't be too bad. And drilling an extra hole or getting another custom control panel should be fairly easy to do. And I certainly was able to do that because I'm terrible. I can't cut a straight piece of wood to save my life. And I didn't, when I did this, I was in Manhattan, so I didn't have a stack of tools with me anyway. So I'll link to that video. I'll link to both of those videos so you could see what I did. My thoughts on MAME, though, That's now, if you've never used MAME, that's a whole other learning curve. And if you're a nerd that loves this stuff, by all means do it. But if you just want it to work, you could consider a Raspberry Pi based JAMA solution. I've talked about those before on the site. I'm not sure which ones are in stock or available to get, but that's fairly easy and they're good. They're not the best, but if you're looking for a fun CRT based multicade, so there's no display lag, it would just be emulation lag, you're probably going to have a great experience. Now, picking up something for the Mister and doing it that way, that's going to be incredible, but if you're already familiar with Mister, then that might actually be the best. You just have to get the right adapter and go from there. So what I would suggest doing is taking a look at the 2 arcade machines that you found, seeing, go there in person and make sure they're in decent condition. Make sure the CRT itself isn't yellowed and crappy. And if that's what you like, awesome. Go for it. And then just try wiring up, if you already own a Mister, try maybe like a MisterCade or something, or look into those JAMA adapters for Raspberry Pi and start there. But if you have a cool CRT based arcade machine and it's working, you could always change stuff in the future. So if you need to buy another Mister for it, maybe look at the Raspberry Pi route. It might actually be cheaper overall to start. And you could always repurpose a Pi and sell the adapter. So that's definitely my thoughts on it. I'll leave links to the adapters and everything. And also, it looks like you're kind of close to me. You know anybody who wants that speakers built into the TV stand thing? Because so many people messaged me out that it's the perfect solution for them, but they're far out of driving distance. And I can't ship anything like that, so I would have to part it out. I would have to ship the speakers and then maybe just ship the feet and the IKEA doors with the speaker material in there. I have no problem with that. I just know that this sounds great. So if you know anybody around there that wants it, that's I just wanted to see it to go to a good home. But if not, I'll just part it out on eBay and I'm sure it'll be totally fine. Next up, Christopher Skurick said, today OLEDs are considered the closest to CRT because they're black levels, but aren't mini LEDs getting better day after day and being more affordable for huge sizes? Yeah, the potential's definitely there. But here's the question. Have I followed CES 2025, of course, and particularly new models from brands like TCL? And do I think that's the way to go, mini LED, or do I think using something like the next generation LG G5 OLEDs would allow OLED to stay at the top? So first and foremost, until I see in person a mini LED TV that looks as good as an OLED, my next TV purchase, like if that one behind me dies, is going to be another OLED. However, I'm waiting for independent reviewers, and my favorite is Vincent Teo from HD TV Test, but I also really enjoy all of the ratings, ratings.com, and I watch a lot of Abby's videos as well. She does pretty great breakdowns of these. Until I see details from those, I'm kind of going to reserve my judgment. But let's just say, that one dies tomorrow and I want to replace it down here. I need to buy something today. I can't wait for the 2025s. So for me personally, I would pick up a leftover 2023 or 2024 LG OLED to put right in that spot. And I'm sure I would be very, very happy with it. The only difference would be is if I was going to be putting it in a room that's very bright all the time, especially as summer rolls around and even as you're winding down to watch TV sometimes, even in the evening, it's really bright. I would then at least consider looking into the other ones. But my main TV watching experience, like when I'm sitting down to watch a movie or when I'm, the rare moment I get to game anymore, it's in a room like this that isn't super, super bright. So at least in the afternoons and stuff. So I'm still going with OLED. I just love the way it looks. And that's just my opinion though. So I would say that if you're looking for a TV in the sort of near future, by the end of the year, just subscribe to HD TV Test on YouTube, watch Vincent's videos and see what he has to say. And same thing with ratings and all that other stuff. But yeah, I don't know for sure what's going to be the best next step. But as of right now, for 77-inch and under, I would still go with OLED in that scenario. Next up, Adam Wells connected a Sega 32X to a JVC X'Eye, and it seems to run just fine, but they're wondering if I heard of any long-term effects damaging either one of those. No, it should be totally fine. My personal preference is to not leave my 32X plugged in all the time because you can't play the original Virtua Racing, you can't play Master System games, even through ROM carts. And also, I just don't like the look of the mushroom turd. I actually think the Genesis and Sega CD together look great. I think the JVC X'Eyes look amazing. But there is also one other factor too, is whenever plastic is on plastic, there's the potential of scratching. So if you have something like a rare and awesome console like the X'Eye, I don't know if I would want my 32X just sitting on top of that plastic the whole time. Also, did you get some kind of 3D printed spacer so it fits perfectly, or is it kind of just flopping around there? That could wear down the cartridge slot. So if you're talking in the context of, do I think it's okay to connect your 32X when you're playing 32X games? I personally would do that. And I would be comfortable as long as, you're just careful of the physical aspect of all this, the scratching and all of that. As far as electrically speaking, there should be absolutely no issues doing that as long as you're using the proper AC adapters, which you said you are, so that's totally fine. I just wouldn't leave it on long term, but I don't think there's any reason not to. There's certainly not, it's not known as bad practice or anything like that. And I had my 32X always connected to my CDX. I used that custom 3D printed adapter from Greg from Laser Bear, and I was comfortable with that. So it's really up to you. There's no reason why you shouldn't. I just don't really like the look. But that's going to be your decision. There is no electrical reason why that would be bad. And as long as you have it connected properly with some kind of adapter in there, adapter plate to make sure it doesn't flop around, then sure. But if you don't have an adapter, then I wouldn't, just because you don't want to put extra stress on the cartridge. You just use it whenever you're using 32X games. So hopefully I was able to paint the right picture, but I always like to err on the side of caution with this stuff. Next are a couple of questions from Nick. First is a question about the SVS, the upcoming scalable video switch from Arthremis that should go on sale any day now, I believe. And the question is, will it support running composite video through the SCART input so that you get composite video on the output side? And no, not for the first batch, but the second batch that's being made that should be out in April-ish will have a toggle switch that allows this. So some quick background. First of all, if you're just talking about, and I know you're not Nick, but if anybody else listening is talking about RGB SCART cables that sync on composite video, those will work totally fine. If you're simply talking about the scenario that Nick has, where maybe you have a bunch of consoles that don't have RGB mods yet, but will eventually, so you run composite video via RCA to a SCART cable and run that through it, or my scenario in which I have all of my consoles outputting sync on composite so that I could always toggle between composite or RGB. If I ever want to do comparisons, or some early 3D graphics games I do think actually look better with composite on a CRT. So there are, also the SMS 3D games. So there are scenarios for it, but the current first run design of the SVS on the SCART input modules doesn't have a switch to toggle any of the sync filtering, so it always gets filtered. Whereas the next version and all future versions will have that. So your choices are to buy your entire SVS setup minus those extra SCART connectors and just kind of maybe hand plug something in until then. You could buy composite input modules for the SVS, especially if you know you might eventually get other consoles that are composite video only. Or you could just wait on those modules or wait for the whole thing until April. But yeah, so the very short answer is no, but next time, and for all future it will. So there's actually a feature that I had asked Arthremis to add because of my setup, and I really want to showcase his work. So I will have a setup that I think I'm always going to have a G-Comp and a G-SCART in two of the setups I have over here, but I do want to build in the main setup with the SVS back there, and that's what I would be personally waiting on. Next question, they recently picked up a condition unknown Laserdisc player, but it doesn't work properly. Do I happen to know a good place to ask for help? No, not at all. You might check the Doomsday Discord, the Doomsday Duplicator, because they're constantly inside of these Laserdisc players to add the RF jack in order to get the raw output to do Doomsday. That might be a place for you. And to be honest, if you're looking to rip your Laserdiscs in insane quality, especially if you have multiple copies that you're trying to get the best version out of, then Doomsday might be something that you'd be looking into anyway. So you could start there. You could just look into Laserdisc forums or any of the places. You might actually need forums. I'm not sure if there'd be any other places for that, but does anybody have any suggestions? Once again, please don't post links because YouTube will delete the links, not the support services, but either way, if you just type in, go to this forum and, this sub channel or whatever, that might be a help if anybody knows it. But no, sorry. Whenever I've had Laserdisc issues, I just traded it out to a friend for a working player or something like that. So sorry to be useless on that one. Next up, Lloyd Smart has a setup that consists of a Mr. FPGA with the analog I/O board connected to a Sony PVM20L4 via a D-sub to RGBS breakout cable. They want to add a Dreamcast and a PS2 to the setup, and they're considering the best way to do this. They know they won't get the best out of the Dreamcast because the 20L4 doesn't support 480p, but it still should be pretty good on RGB with 240p and 480i. Yes, it will. It'll look awesome. The upcoming SVS from Arthremis looks perfect for this, but how should they connect it all up? They're thinking SCART input modules for the Dreamcast and PS2, and VGA for the Mister, then a VGA output module that they could connect to the PVM with their existing cable. That's exactly right. Yes, but let me continue. Would the signals from the SCART inputs pass through correctly to the VGA output? Yes. Or would you be better off with some combination? Nope, that would absolutely work. RGBS will go to RGB horizontal sync on the VGA port, which is exactly what you would want going to your PVM, as well as any other device that supports RGBS over a D-sub connector. So that's perfect. Next, they think they read somewhere that a BNC output module from the SVS is coming in the future, so maybe that would be better. Nope, it's only better if you already have a bunch of BNC cables set up and you just want to replace it directly with this. But if you already are using a D-sub to RGBS breakout cable, stick with VGA. I think that would be absolutely perfect. Finally, what kind of cable would I recommend for getting RGB out of the PS2? They're in the UK, so they're thinking retro gaming cables, SCART Pack-a-Punch would be a good choice, but they're not sure which type to get. Would C-Sync be the correct choice here? No, never with the PlayStation. And that's I'm going to just give you the short answer and then I'll explain. Just get Sync on Luma as the choice, and you'll never have to worry about anything, especially in the scenario of a PVM20L4. And that's the answer. I'll give some explanation as to why, but if you don't like nerd stuff, you can just skip on out of this one. But here's the thing. PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 do not output pure C-Sync without some kind of mod that disables something else. But the only reason you would need pure C-Sync over any other choice is, one, for interference off of composite video, which makes sense, or devices that cannot accept any other signal. One of those would be a data path vision card, which once again, that's why we designed the SCART Cleaner. But it's not a common scenario, and it's not your specific scenario. So when you get that cable from Retro Gaming Cables that says C-Sync, it actually adds a sync stripper, which is another circuit that adds more voltage and a bunch of conversion to it, and it is not what you're looking for. And in fact, it's almost never what anybody's looking for. I've talked to Rob a couple times over the years asking him to just not sell those and make them like a private choice because it's just never the right answer in 99% of modern current setups. A decade ago, more than that, when I started RetroRGB, there were a bunch of scenarios where you might need one, but we've all figured out the correct ways to go about doing these things. So getting a Sync on Luma cable means that you're using the luminance pin of S-Video to get sync, which will still work totally fine, but it also frees up composite video. So while you don't have to ever worry about adding a gun con for light gun games messing with any sync signals, it's just nice to have it separate, so you just don't even have to worry. So I would get the specific cable that's Sync on Luma with the little composite video jack on there in case you ever need to add a light gun, and I think that would be totally fine. I'm going to try to leave a direct link to exactly that one. Hopefully they have this in stock. If not, I'll try to find another seller for you that might. But yeah, great questions. I think your plan for the SVS is exactly what you would want, and I would just try to get anything other than a PS2 cable with a sync stripper in it. So I'll see if I could find a good link for you. Well, that's it for this week. If you have any questions, please just ask wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, it's kind of hard to figure out what's a new question on an old post. But also, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through them in real time and having a conversation as if we were hanging out at an expo or a bar or a coffee shop or something. And I like these to be really chill and laid back. So any question at all, just please wherever you support in the latest Q&A post. And of course, and especially thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it's you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.